Claire, answer me. Why does Noah look exactly like me?
Because he is your son.
My son?
I found out I was pregnant after I left.
I lost 16 years?
And he spent them wondering who his father was.
Does he know?
No. He has no idea who you are.
I missed every birthday, every Christmas.
You cannot change the past.
But if he gives me one chance, I will spend the rest of my life making it right.
Sometimes the biggest goodbye happens before you even know what you are losing. Claire Bennett stood beneath the porch light with a single suitcase at her feet while rain tapped softly against the driveway. The yellow glow from the house spilled across the wet concrete, stretching long shadows into the darkness. Behind her, the front door remained closed. No footsteps followed. No voice called her name. Inside that house was the man she had once believed she would grow old with. Ethan Carter had been her first love, her best friend, and for a while, her entire world. Now he was just a silhouette moving behind a living room window, separated from her by pride, hurt, and 1,000 words neither of them had said. Claire wrapped her arms around herself as a cool October wind swept through the quiet suburban street outside Denver. The argument had started hours earlier. It had not been loud. It had not been dramatic. Somehow that made it worse. Weeks of misunderstandings, pressure from Ethan's family, and constant tension had slowly turned small disappointments into a wall neither of them knew how to climb. Earlier that evening, Ethan's mother had looked Claire in the eye and calmly suggested that Ethan deserved someone whose future matched his ambitions. The words were polite. Sharp words rarely need to be loud. Ethan had stood there in silence. Claire remembered waiting for him to say something, anything. Instead, he lowered his gaze. That silence had broken something inside her. She picked up her suitcase and walked toward her car parked at the curb. Rain gathered on the windshield beneath the glow of a street lamp. For a moment, she hesitated. Every instinct told her to turn around, knock on the door, and ask Ethan if there was still something worth saving. But the ache in her chest already felt too heavy. She opened the driver's door and slipped inside. Across the street, Halloween decorations swayed gently in the wind. Orange lights blinked on a neighboring porch. Life continued as though nothing important was happening. Claire started the engine and pulled away from the curb. In the rearview mirror, the house grew smaller with every passing second until it disappeared entirely. She did not know that her life had already begun changing in ways she could not imagine. She did not know that a new heartbeat quietly existed beneath her own. She did not know that the chapter ending tonight would leave behind a story that neither she nor Ethan would fully understand for many years. As the highway stretched ahead beneath the falling rain, Claire wiped a tear from her cheek and focused on the road. Behind her was the life she thought she wanted. Ahead of her was a future she never saw coming. 3 weeks later, Claire Bennett sat alone in the waiting room of a small medical clinic on the edge of Colorado Springs, turning a paper coffee cup slowly between her hands. Outside, the last leaves of autumn drifted across the parking lot beneath a gray morning sky. She had come because something felt different. At first she blamed the stress. Leaving Ethan had shattered the life she thought she understood. Finding a new apartment, starting over, and carrying the weight of unanswered questions had left her exhausted. That was what she kept telling herself. Stress. Nothing more. A nurse eventually appeared in the doorway and called her name. Claire followed her down a quiet hallway lined with framed photographs of mountain landscapes. 20 minutes later she found herself sitting in a small examination room staring at a white wall while a clock ticked softly above the sink. When the doctor entered carrying a folder, his smile was warm and professional. He spoke gently, but Claire barely heard the first few words. Everything seemed to blur together until one sentence reached her clearly. "Claire, you are pregnant." For several seconds she simply stared at him. The room suddenly felt very still. The ticking clock. The distant voices in the hallway. Even the sound of traffic outside seemed to disappear. Pregnant. The word echoed through her mind again and again. She lowered her eyes to the ultrasound image resting on the desk between them. A tiny shape. Barely visible. Yet somehow more powerful than anything she had ever seen. Tears filled her eyes before she realized they were coming. Not from fear. Not entirely. From shock. From wonder. From the overwhelming realization that she was no longer alone. Later that afternoon she sat inside her apartment near the window overlooking a busy street. The ultrasound photo rested on the kitchen table beside a cold cup of tea. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting narrow lines across the paper. Claire reached for her phone more than once. Ethan's number was still there. She had never deleted it. Her thumb hovered over the screen. So many times she imagined what she might say. "You are going to be a father. We need to talk. There is something you deserve to know." But every version ended the same way. With uncertainty. With questions she could not answer. Ethan had chosen silence when she needed him most. His family had made it clear she did not belong. The wounds were still too fresh. As evening settled across the city, Claire placed the phone face down on the table. She looked once more at the ultrasound image and rested her hand gently over it. Outside, headlights moved along the street below. Life continued in every direction. Inside that small apartment, a decision quietly took shape. She would protect this child. She would build a future one day at a time. And somewhere hundreds of miles away, Ethan Carter finished another ordinary day without the slightest idea that the most important part of his life had already begun. 16 years can disappear quietly when measured in school lunches, alarm clocks, and late nights spent worrying about bills. Claire Bennett learned that one ordinary day at a time. The tiny apartment where she once sat holding an ultrasound photo had long since been replaced by a modest two-bedroom house on a quiet street in Colorado Springs. The paint on the front porch had faded from years of snow and summer sun, but every corner of the home carried evidence of a life built with determination. Soccer cleats rested beside the front door. School certificates hung on the hallway wall. A stack of textbooks occupied the kitchen table. Claire stood at the stove one Saturday morning flipping pancakes while a 16-year-old boy rushed downstairs carrying a backpack over one shoulder. Noah Bennett had grown taller than her months ago. His sandy brown hair never seemed to stay in place, and his blue eyes carried the same thoughtful intensity that had once belonged to Ethan. Claire noticed it every day. She simply never said it aloud. "You are leaving for the library on a Saturday?" she asked with a smile. Noah grabbed a pancake from the plate and shrugged. "The robotics competition is next month." Claire laughed softly. "I know. I paid the registration fee." Noah grinned before heading toward the door. Moments later, the house grew quiet again. Claire watched through the window as he climbed into a friend's car and disappeared down the street. The silence that followed felt familiar. Not lonely. Just reflective. There had been difficult years. Years when she worked 2 jobs. Years when unexpected expenses arrived at exactly the wrong time. Years when exhaustion became part of daily life. Yet somehow they had made it through every challenge together. Noah had become the kind of young man people naturally trusted. Teachers praised his work ethic. Neighbors admired his manners. Friends sought his advice. Claire often wondered if character could be inherited. If so, Noah had inherited more than he realized. Later that evening, after dinner, Noah sat at the kitchen table finishing homework while rain tapped gently against the windows. Without looking up from his notebook, he asked a question that caused Claire's heart to tighten. "Mom?" "Yes?" "Have you ever thought about my dad?" The room seemed to grow still. Noah finally looked up. There was no anger in his expression. No resentment. Only curiosity. The kind that naturally arrives with age. Claire folded a dish towel slowly between her hands. "Sometimes," she answered honestly. Noah nodded. "Do you think he ever thinks about us?" Claire glanced toward the rain-covered window. Somewhere beyond those dark clouds existed a life she had not touched in 16 years. A life connected to the boy sitting across from her. "I do not know," she said quietly. And for the first time in many years, she found herself wondering the same thing. Ethan Carter stood alone in the corner office on the 32nd floor, looking out over the Denver skyline as the sun disappeared behind the Rocky Mountains. The city below glowed with thousands of lights, each one representing a life, a story, a destination. To most people, Ethan had everything. At 46 years old, he was the founder and chief executive officer of one of the fastest-growing technology companies in the region. Business magazines featured his photograph. Investors competed for meetings with him. His company headquarters occupied an entire glass tower downtown. Success followed him everywhere. Yet every evening, when the meetings ended and the elevators emptied, the silence returned. A framed photograph sat on a shelf behind his desk. Most visitors assumed it showed a relative. Nobody ever asked. The image had faded slightly over the years. A younger Ethan stood beside a smiling woman beneath a summer sky. Claire. He had never removed the photograph. Not once in 16 years. Earlier that afternoon, his assistant had placed a stack of invitations on his desk. Charity galas. Corporate events. Networking dinners. The usual requests. Ethan signed documents without looking up. His attention drifted elsewhere. It happened more often than he admitted. Certain songs. Certain streets. Certain seasons. Somehow they always brought him back to October 16 years earlier. Back to the night Claire drove away. For years he had convinced himself she was happier without him. That belief made the regret easier to carry. Sometimes he wondered whether she still lived in Colorado. Sometimes he wondered if she had married. Other times he deliberately forced himself not to think about her at all. None of those strategies ever worked for very long. The office door opened quietly. His longtime friend and business partner, Daniel Brooks, stepped inside carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You are still here?" Daniel asked. Ethan smiled faintly. "Apparently." Daniel handed him a cup and sat down. "You know, the board is convinced you work too much." Ethan laughed softly. "The board complains when I work too little too." Daniel studied him for a moment. They had known each other for nearly 2 decades. Some friendships reach a point where explanations become unnecessary. "You were thinking about her again," Daniel said. It was not a question. Ethan looked toward the city lights beyond the glass. After a long silence, he nodded. Daniel sighed. 16 years. I know. Did you ever try to find her? Ethan wrapped both hands around the warm coffee cup. A few times. Daniel waited. And? Ethan stared at the reflection in the window. Every time I got close, I stopped. Why? Another silence followed. This one felt heavier. Because if she left to escape me, Ethan said quietly, then finding her would only reopen a door she chose to close. Far below, traffic moved steadily through the city. Life continued in every direction. Neither man realized that only 70 miles away, a 16-year-old boy with Ethan's eyes sat at a kitchen table finishing homework, completely unaware that the father he had never met was thinking about him for reasons he could not possibly understand. The email arrived on a quiet Tuesday afternoon while Noah Bennett was finishing a physics assignment at the kitchen table. Outside, spring sunlight filtered through the maple tree in the front yard, scattering moving shadows across the floor. Claire was folding laundry nearby when she heard a sudden shout. Mom! Noah practically jumped out of his chair. His eyes were fixed on the laptop screen. Mom, you need to see this. Claire walked over quickly, worried for a moment that something was wrong. Instead, she found Noah grinning so widely she could barely understand him. He pointed at the email. The National Future Innovators Scholarship. One of the most competitive student programs in the country. Thousands applied every year. Only a handful received invitations to the final stage. Claire covered her mouth as she read the message. Noah had made it to the national finals. For several seconds neither of them spoke. Then Claire wrapped her arms around him. "I am so proud of you," she whispered. Noah laughed. "I cannot believe it." The final competition would take place in Denver 6 weeks later. Students from across the country would present projects before a panel of judges, educators, and industry leaders. The winner would receive a full scholarship package and national recognition. Over the following weeks, the house transformed into a workshop. Robotics components covered the dining room table. Sketches, notes, and diagrams appeared on every available surface. Noah worked late into the evenings refining every detail. Claire watched him with quiet admiration. Every challenge seemed to motivate him rather than discourage him. The morning of the competition arrived bright and clear. Denver's convention center buzzed with excitement as students, families, and educators filled the massive building. Booths stretched across the exhibition hall beneath high glass ceilings. Television crews moved between displays. Judges carried clipboards. Claire stood beside Noah's project display trying to remain calm. Her son looked confident, but she could see the nervous energy in the way he adjusted his name badge. Then an announcement echoed through the building. The keynote speaker and primary sponsor of the scholarship program had arrived. A crowd immediately gathered near the main stage. Claire barely paid attention at first. She was focused on Noah. Then she heard a familiar name spoken over the loudspeakers. Ethan Carter. The world seemed to stop. Claire felt her breath catch in her chest. 16 years disappeared in an instant. Across the convention center, cameras flashed as Ethan stepped onto the stage. He looked older now. More mature. More confident. Yet unmistakably the same man. Claire stood frozen among hundreds of strangers while memories she had carefully buried came rushing back. At that exact moment, several yards away, Noah turned toward the stage as well. Neither Ethan nor Noah knew it yet, but destiny had already placed them inside the same room. And for the first time in 16 years, the distance between father and son had become small enough to disappear. The convention center remained crowded long after Ethan Carter finished his keynote speech. Students moved between exhibits explaining inventions, answering questions, and making final adjustments before judging sessions began. The atmosphere buzzed with nervous excitement. Across the exhibition floor, Noah Bennett stood beside his robotics project reviewing notes one last time. Claire stayed a few feet away, trying to appear relaxed even though her heart had not stopped racing since hearing Ethan's name. She had managed to avoid him so far. In a building filled with thousands of people, that should have been easy. Fate seemed to have other plans. A group of judges approached Noah's display shortly before noon. Among them was a familiar face. Ethan had decided to personally visit several finalist projects after the presentation. It was something he did every year. Most students never expected the program's primary sponsor to stop by their booth. Noah noticed the group approaching and straightened his shoulders. Claire froze. Ethan stepped closer, studying the project with genuine interest. "This is impressive," he said. Noah smiled nervously. "Thank you, sir." The moment Ethan heard the teenager speak, something stirred inside him. Nothing dramatic. Just a strange feeling he could not explain. He listened as Noah described the engineering process, the software architecture, and the months of testing behind the design. The more Noah spoke, the more Ethan found himself paying attention to details that had nothing to do with robotics. The confidence. The calm focus. The way he paused briefly before answering difficult questions. Somehow it all felt oddly familiar. One judge asked Noah how he handled setbacks during development. Noah smiled. "My mom always says that frustration is just another form of practice." Ethan laughed softly. "That sounds like good advice." "It usually is," Noah replied. For a brief second, Ethan felt something he had not experienced in years. A sense of connection. The conversation lasted only a few minutes before the judges moved on. Yet Ethan found himself glancing back twice. Noah returned to his project, unaware that he had left an impression. Claire, however, noticed everything. She saw the way Ethan looked at Noah. She saw the confusion in his expression. Most of all, she saw the similarities she had spent 16 years trying not to think about. Later that afternoon, finalists gathered near the main ballroom for interviews and networking sessions. Ethan happened to pass through the same corridor. Once again he spotted Noah. This time the resemblance struck him even harder. The shape of the eyes. The slight tilt of the head while listening. Even the half-smile looked familiar. Ethan stopped walking. For a moment he simply watched from across the room. It made no sense. Thousands of teenagers existed in America. Similarities happened all the time. Yet something refused to let go of his attention. Across the hallway, Noah turned unexpectedly and their eyes met again. Neither spoke. Neither understood why the moment felt significant. But somewhere deep inside, both felt the same strange pull. And for Ethan, a question had quietly begun forming, one he could not explain and could no longer ignore. The awards ceremony ended just before sunset, but Ethan Carter remained inside the convention center long after most guests had left. The question that had followed him all day refused to disappear. He told himself it was coincidence. A familiar expression. A similar smile. Nothing more. Yet every time he replayed his conversations with Noah Bennett, the feeling returned stronger than before. Across town, Claire sat alone in her hotel room staring at the Denver skyline through the window. She had hoped 16 years of distance would prepare her for seeing Ethan again. Instead, one unexpected day had undone years of carefully built emotional walls. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. The screen displayed an unfamiliar number. She answered cautiously. The voice on the other end immediately stole the air from her lungs. Claire? Ethan's voice sounded older, deeper, but unmistakable. For several seconds she could not speak. How did you get this number? She finally asked. That is not important, Ethan replied gently. I need to ask you something. Silence filled the space between them. Claire already knew. Somewhere deep inside, she had known this moment would eventually arrive. Ethan took a slow breath. The student today. Noah. Claire closed her eyes. Yes. Another pause followed. Why does he look so much like me? The room seemed to grow perfectly still. Traffic moved below the hotel. Distant sirens echoed somewhere in the city. Yet Claire heard none of it. 16 years of secrets stood between a single question and a single answer. Ethan waited. His heart pounded harder than it had during any business negotiation or public speech. Finally Claire sat down on the edge of the bed and whispered the truth she had carried alone for more than half her life. Because he is your son. Ethan stopped breathing for a moment. He lowered himself slowly into a chair inside his office. The city lights beyond the windows blurred. What did you say? He asked quietly. Tears filled Claire's eyes. I found out after I left. I did not know when I walked away. Ethan, I swear I did not know. Neither spoke for several seconds. The weight of 16 lost years settled heavily between them. Ethan stared at the floor. Memories flashed through his mind. Every birthday he had missed. Every school year. Every milestone. Every ordinary moment that fathers were supposed to witness. Somewhere in the distance he heard Claire crying softly. I never wanted to hurt you, she said. Ethan closed his eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice trembled. All day today I kept looking at him because something felt familiar. Now I understand why. And for the first time since that rainy night 16 years earlier, the truth stood fully revealed between them, impossible to hide and impossible to ignore. The next morning arrived beneath a sky washed pale blue by the early Colorado sun. Claire barely slept. The conversation with Ethan replayed endlessly in her mind. 16 years of silence had ended in less than 10 minutes. Across town, Ethan sat alone in his hotel suite staring at an old photograph he had carried for years inside a desk drawer. Claire's smile looked exactly as he remembered. Younger. Carefree. Full of plans neither of them had lived. Beside the photograph rested a notebook where he had written business ideas over the years. For the first time, none of those ideas mattered. Somewhere nearby was a son he had never known existed. Around noon, Ethan called Claire again. This time there were no difficult questions. No accusations. Only honesty. They spent nearly an hour talking about the years between them. Claire told him about Noah's first day of school, his love of science, his habit of reading long after bedtime. Ethan listened quietly. Occasionally he smiled. Occasionally he closed his eyes. Every story felt precious and painful at the same time. Finally he asked the question he had been avoiding. Does Noah know? Claire looked out the window before answering. No. Silence followed. Ethan nodded slowly even though she could not see him. Then he deserves to hear it from both of us. Later that afternoon they met for coffee at a quiet cafe several blocks from the convention center. The moment Claire walked through the door, time seemed to fold inward. 16 years had changed them both, yet something familiar remained. Neither rushed forward. Neither knew exactly what to say. They simply sat across from each other and shared the kind of conversation that should have happened years ago. There was sadness. Regret. But surprisingly little anger. Life had already taken enough from both of them. As the hours passed, one truth became impossible to ignore. The misunderstandings that destroyed their relationship had never been as large as the silence that followed. Before leaving, Ethan looked directly at her. I would like to meet him. Claire nodded. I think he would like that too. The meeting happened the following evening in a small park overlooking a lake near downtown Denver. Noah arrived beside Claire, confused but curious. Ethan stood waiting near the water. The setting sun reflected across the lake in shades of gold and orange. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Claire gently placed a hand on Noah's shoulder. Her voice trembled slightly. There is something important you need to know. The next few minutes changed all three lives forever. Noah listened without interrupting. His eyes moved from Claire to Ethan and back again. Shock appeared first. Then disbelief. Then understanding. When he finally looked at Ethan, the resemblance seemed impossible to miss. Ethan expected anger. Questions. Maybe even rejection. Instead Noah asked something simple. You really did not know? Ethan swallowed hard and shook his head. No. If I had known, I would have found you. Noah studied him for several seconds. Then he nodded slowly. The years they lost could never be returned. But standing beside the lake beneath the fading evening light, all three realized something important. The future still belonged to them. 1 year later, the morning sun poured across the football field of a Colorado high school as rows of folding chairs filled with families, cameras, and proud smiles stretched across the grass. A warm breeze carried the sound of conversation and distant laughter beneath a cloudless June sky. Graduation day had finally arrived. Noah Bennett adjusted his cap and gown while standing among his classmates near the entrance tunnel. The scholarship competition in Denver had changed everything. Not only had he earned national recognition, but it had also given him something he never expected to find. A father. The previous 12 months had passed quickly. There had been long conversations, awkward introductions, shared dinners, and countless moments of catching up. Ethan never tried to replace the years they lost. Instead, he showed up. For every achievement. Every question. Every ordinary moment that life offered. Slowly, a relationship had formed. Not perfect. Not instant. Real. From the stands, Claire watched Noah laugh with friends before the ceremony began. She could hardly believe how much had changed. The boy she once carried home from kindergarten now stood on the edge of adulthood. Beside her sat Ethan. The distance that once separated them felt smaller than ever. They were not the same people who had said goodbye 16 years earlier. Life had reshaped them. Yet somehow it had also brought them back to the same place. The principal stepped to the podium. Speeches began. Names were called one by one. Finally, Noah's name echoed across the field. Applause erupted. Claire stood immediately. Ethan joined her. Together they watched Noah walk across the stage beneath bright summer sunlight to receive his diploma. For a brief moment, Noah turned toward the crowd. His eyes found them instantly. Both of them. His mother and his father standing side by side. The smile that crossed his face seemed brighter than the morning itself. After the ceremony, families flooded onto the field for photographs and congratulations. Graduates hugged parents. Friends promised to stay in touch. Cameras flashed from every direction. Noah found Claire first and wrapped his arms around her. "We did it," he said. Tears filled her eyes. "You did it." Moments later, Ethan joined them. For several seconds the three simply stood together beneath the open sky. No speeches. No dramatic words. Just gratitude. Noah eventually wandered off to celebrate with friends, leaving Claire and Ethan alone near the 50-yard line. Around them, the crowd slowly thinned. Ethan reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a small velvet box. Claire stared at it in surprise. He smiled nervously, something she had not seen in many years. "Life gave us a second chance," he said quietly. "I do not want to waste it." The box opened. Inside rested a simple ring. Nothing extravagant. Just beautiful. Just meaningful. Tears immediately filled Claire's eyes. She looked toward the horizon where the future stretched beyond the mountains. Then back at the man she had never truly stopped loving. Her answer came easily. As applause and laughter drifted across the field behind them, Claire nodded. And for the first time in many years, what began with a goodbye finally felt complete. Some people lose each other by accident. The lucky ones find their way home.